So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. The task force, as I said, didn't say anything about what to do with used fuel. And when you look at what's going on with used fuel management right now, the Blue Ribbon Commission, the president decided not to go forward with Yucca Mountain licensing. To be honest, that's still sort of caught up in waiting for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to render a decision on it. And then I think everybody will probably be back in court because they don't like the decision one way or the other. We personally think that the license application can't be withdrawn right now, that the Nuclear Waste Policy Act requires them to continue. You can withdraw it on technical basis, not policy basis. So we think that if it gets to court, you're going to end up having the license application be continue to be reviewed. Now that's going to be a very long review process because DOE doesn't have an office even looking at it right now. So that won't go fast. But the Blue Ribbon Commission that was formed by the president is going to issue its draft report the end of this month. They're scheduled for July 28th. Hopefully they'll make it. 29th, I'm sorry. Hopefully they'll make that, but it's soon. And in essence, from what we've seen them put out already, it's going to call for centralized interim storage as part of a strategic management program. It's going to call for looking to begin a new search for a repository because you will have some residual waste, whether it's a once-through system or even if we recycle. And it's going to call for research on recycling. The commission has been explicitly told not to mention Yucca Mountain or to look at Yucca Mountain, so I don't expect it will. But members of Congress certainly continue to talk about Yucca Mountain, and we'll see what happens. I think the message I would give you right now on used fuel is that it's always made sense to do some sort of centralized interim storage. It still makes sense. The commission report may help that move, and whether we as a nation close the fuel cycle and do reprocessing or recycling, or we keep it open and go directly to a repository, we're not going to get there very fast. And the good news on that is you can manage, while used nuclear fuel is clearly something you got to manage well, you can manage it very well. The bad news is because you can manage it very well, as a nation we don't deal with stuff unless it's a crisis. So it'll take us a long time to move down the road to a repository or to a decision on recycling. But I think the Blue Ribbon Commission will help in that direction. I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of things on the public and what we're doing. And we're out there trying to do more education with the public. Some of you may have seen our ads. Most of our stuff is, it's in the Wall Street Journal now regionally, but most of our stuff is inside the Beltway. Though we're trying to get our companies to help out and take some of the ads and put their name on it or use them for us and do more on education. We're working very hard to work with the states, with governors and state legislators, as well as within the Beltway with the federal folks to help educate on Fukushima and the lessons learned and so forth. So that is sort of a major thrust for us following it. Information during the accident that we put out was very helpful to a lot of people. We're trying to continue that and broaden out for the folks that are very interested, and you're going to see us do more and more of that. And I keep encouraging you to go to our website to see what's there. We have done polling, and immediately after the accident, what we found was that favorability had dropped in the general public from basically about 64% in 2009 down to 46%. It didn't move to opposition. It moved to neutral. The opposition hardly changed at all. So what happened was the public, and I may have gotten more saturated than maybe even the public because we had the TV on from Japan and from here 24/7 for over 2 months. And I don't blame the public. I mean, if you were watching what was on TV all the time, all you saw was Fukushima. And then you saw the little trailers telling you stuff. And probably one of the more egregious things, I think, is that there's 30,000 people dead in Japan because of the tsunami and earthquake. There is no one dead because of any radiation from Fukushima. There were 4 people who were killed at Fukushima. 1 fell off a crane at the earthquake. 2 drowned in the turbine building during the tsunami, and 1 individual died from a heart attack because of heat stroke working at the site about 3 weeks ago. But you would never have understood that if you were watching what was on our TV news. I thought print news actually did a very good job in many cases in trying to explain things. But the fact that the public fell off in favorability is not a surprise. Now, we just did some polling about 2 weeks ago, and the 46 is up to 50. It's not a huge jump, but it's going the right way. I know that a Southern company's been polling around the Vogtle site, and they had dropped down, and I think they're back almost up to where they were pre-Fukushima around the site, and I'm going to show you some site stuff in a minute. The other thing that we find is that the opinion leaders are not at 50% in favorability, they're at 66%. They're much more tuned in to reading the stuff, they're much more tuned in to trying to understand as opposed to just the visceral reaction. And I'm not at all faulting the visceral reaction. I actually can understand that really well. The last thing on that slide that I think is important is that 81%, and this is in the same time that we're seeing 50% on favorability, really agree that we should take lessons learned and we should continue doing what we're doing. And that includes new plants. So the American public is not opposing nuclear. They want to know more. They want to know it's safe. They want to know we learned something. They want to know we're doing something with what we learned. We didn't just learn it, but we're actually applying it. And that's the thing that I think we're going to concentrate on as we go forward. We just finished about 2 or 3 weeks ago what we call a neighbors survey, which is around our plants within the 10-mile emergency planning zone. We don't interview, we don't poll workers or their family. We poll the neighbors to workers and their family that live within the 10-mile emergency planning zone. And what you can see there is a very minor change. I mean, from 2009, and this is all post-Fukushima, by the way, favorability really dropped from 90% to 86%, which is really very high for people around the site. I think that's a tribute to the communication by the plants and their employees to their neighbors, not only on Fukushima, but in general. You need to develop a trust level. You can't do it in the middle of an accident. So you've had to develop the trust level over years so that when you're communicating about the accident in Japan, they're actually willing to listen to you and take it on board and ask you questions. And I think you see that, and I think one of the things that jumped out at me was that 59% were very favorable, and really only 4% were very unfavorable. So around the sites, we've maintained that. And if you look at the next PowerPoint that you have, the acceptability to build is still high around existing sites. We are building both Summer and Vogtle are existing sites. And many of the other companies that are looking down the road to build are also looking. We do have some greenfield sites, but most of them are existing sites. And part of the reason is you have infrastructure there, and part of the reason is you actually have a supportive public there. And I think that's what you're seeing in the polling there. So if I were to, I'll wrap up and then take questions. And again, what I'd like to do is allow the financial community folks to ask the questions, and I'll get with the media right afterwards. I think the first thing I want to emphasize, and I'm kind of Johnny One Note, but it's true in our industry, is from a safe operation, that's our focus right now. It's the top priority in our industry. Okay? Not only is it critical because NRC is out there, but it's critical for public confidence, it's critical for us to keep operating the plants, and it's the top priority for the people at those plants. Okay? And they are going to stay focused on that as they take the lessons learned from Fukushima and begin to apply them at our sites. I think that I'd emphasize again that outside of a couple of politicians, the political process has not been quiet, but it's been very, very measured, very interested, and to be honest, very supportive. And that's been both House and Senate and Republicans and Democrats. And just like everything else in our country, those that yell the loudest usually get heard. And this isn't a case where it's very few yelling. It's mostly everybody else listening and asking very good questions. I think we're going to see public attitudes improve. I did a short segment on CNBC this morning, and Becky asked me, did I think, how were things going to be in the long term? And I told her I thought in the long term public opinion would come back and be very supportive. And I told her that I thought we were going to end up having to build hundreds of plants between now and 2050 We have been telling you that we're going to build 4 to 8 between now and 2020. We told you that before Fukushima. I'll say that it's still true after Fukushima. But if we're going to have electricity supply, if we're going to not emit lots of stuff, I attended a meeting recently where an author said that he sees 3 megatrends, and his megatrends were, decarbonization, electrification, and urbanization in the world, not just in the United States. And those are certainly megatrends when you think about them in the developing countries. Certainly urbanization when you read any of the reports. But if we're going to do urbanization, decarbonization, and electrification, nuclear is going to play an important role. It's not the single solution. It's part of the strength of a diversified electricity system. So we actually see between now and 2050, we're going to have to replace most, if not all, of our existing operating plants. There's 104 of them. And we're going to have to meet the new demand that's coming up from our growing population and hopefully a growing economy. I'll stop with that and welcome questions from any of our financial folks here.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. If you assume that the U.S. government may not be able to provide loan guarantees much more than they have now, where do you think the risk appetite and capital will come from to build the next 5 or 6 plants? Thank you.
I think what we're seeing, particularly with $5 natural gas, it's very hard for merchant plants to go forward in this market, the electricity market. I think in regulated states, like Georgia and South Carolina, probably Florida and other states in the Southeast, the ability to go forward is as important by what the state does. And in both South Carolina and Georgia, you have very good state legislation. You have very favorable Public Utility Commission because they're looking out over the long term to make sure they have a diversified portfolio of generating sources. And they're not looking at the near term as this is the only thing I can do. So I think we'll see the capital markets. I mean, Southern Company is building, SCANA is building, and they're getting financing. Southern Company has a loan guarantee. It's not finalized yet. It helps reduce the cost of capital to their customers, so the Public Service Commission likes it. If they didn't get it, they'd still be building. So I think what we're going to see is in regulated markets, it's going to go forward. The other thing, if we can stay standardized in our country, standardized designs, and I'm not marketing Westinghouse's AP1000, but it's the example right now. We're building 4 of them, okay, in the Southeast. Other companies are looking at them. Our assessment is if we can stay standardized and the NRC stays disciplined on the standardized designs, we can take the current 10-year time to market, which is what we're seeing for Vogtle and Summer, and bring it down to about 7 years. And that's both in savings and licensing because you're standardized, and it's improvements in construction because you've now done modular construction. And from a financing standpoint and total capital cost, a 3-year reduction is a significant benefit from the cost of the plant.